I've been hearing more and more from people recently trying to run great business meetings with large groups of people for a whole bunch of different reasons. Today, they find themselves in what should have been a small group conversation that now includes 25, 50, 70 people. And as those conversations roll out, typically 1 to maybe 5 people are getting any kind of airtime. They're speaking in any given meeting. So, what do you do, right? How do you have a successful conversation with lots of people? Well, the skills that we have learned naturally in growing up and in business school have really made us great at having one on one conversations. We are attuned to be watching for body language, for tracking eye gaze, and we have a sense of how we need to naturally shift and take turns when it's just us paying attention to one other person. We have this nice fat pipe of attention that we can give to each other. That starts to break down as we add more and more people to the conversation. So once you add that third person, now you have to split your attention between 2 different people. There are 3 potential relationships going on in that conversation. Add a fourth person, and now there are 6 relationships. And with a fifth person, quite dramatically, you're up to 10 possible relationships to track as the conversation's going on. This is why science often recommends that the sweet spot for a group conversation is somewhere between 5 and 7. And then after that, you start to dramatically lose effectiveness. So, does that mean that you should just kick all those other people out of the meeting and make sure all of your meetings are down to 7 people? Well, certainly, if there are people in that room who aren't relevant to what you're doing and who could be doing other things, you should absolutely let them free to go do other work. But there are occasions where we really do want large groups involved. So, if that's your case, here are some things you need to do to make sure that all of those people have a chance to participate and that you get to benefit from the diversity of all those perspectives by bringing those voices into the room. Let's take a look at some math to understand what that looks like. The number of potential relationships in any group is equal to the number of people times the number of people minus 1 over 2. Let's say you've got 25 people in your meeting. Well, that's 300 potential relationships to keep track of. What happens when it goes up to 50? 1,225 relationships to keep track of. So obviously, there's no way for all of those 1,225 relationships to get the full attention that they might deserve in your 1 hour meeting. So let's look at some strategies you can use to break these large group discussions down and make them productive for everyone. First, you want to look at different ways to facilitate turn taking. In a normal 1-to-1 person conversation, we're using basically what's called open discussion. We each just speak when we feel like we need to speak and pay attention to all those subtle cues about when it's our turn and when we should yield the floor. In a large group setting, that doesn't really work. What we end up doing instead is something more like a broadcast, which is what you get when you go to a webinar where one person speaks and everybody else listens. You hope. So if you wish to get more people involved, try one of these techniques. The popcorn technique is where people volunteer to speak and then each take turns. Now it's called popcorn because for any given question, each person only speaks once, just like the kernel of corn can only pop once. You can also use a go-around where people who have something to say are given an assigned order, and then you go around and talk to each one of them in turn. Finally, you can use the pass the baton or talking stick technique, where people who want to speak volunteer, and then as each person finishes, they nominate the next person to speak. And in this way, you give everybody a chance to get their voices heard and set some expectations about how turns will be taken. Now, facilitating turn taking can get more voices in the room, but it certainly doesn't give you enough time to hear from all 25 people at once. So for that, what you need to do is create a way to both improve turn taking and conversational focus by breaking that large group into smaller groups. Two techniques that come in particularly useful here are milling, where you ask the group to break into pairs and each pair discusses a question, and then you ring a bell and they reform new pairs. Online, you can do this using breakouts or positional software, and in the real world, you can ask people to move around the room. Breakout groups are accomplishing the same thing. They're taking that large group conversation and creating many smaller group conversations all happening in parallel. It's kind of like parallel processing for your computers. You get all kinds of things done at once. Put these together and you get the master technique, 1-to-all, which is a brilliant way to unlock the thinking and perspectives of lots of people at once. You can check out more about the 1-to-all technique in this video. Okay, so there are two things to think about in large groups: how you regulate turn taking or decide who gets to speak when, and how you can take that large group and then break it into smaller groups. There's a final way in which large group conversations can get more voices out at the same time, and that's to change the conversational interface. So what does that mean? Well, most conversations are audio and verbal, right? We talk and we listen. But you can also have a conversation in writing. So anytime you're asking a group to use the chat to answer or write their ideas on sticky notes, you're changing the conversational interface. You're making it a text-based interface and allowing more people to be part of the conversation at the same time. You can also use techniques like proximity or position, asking people to group ideas together in writing or literally move themselves physically in the room to indicate preferences or alignment of ideas. Finally, hand signals are really useful. If you have seen the fist to 5 technique, where people show with their hands on a scale of 0 to 5 their alignment or their understanding on an issue, this is a really great way to see very quickly how everybody feels about a topic at once. And then finally, technology has opened up all kinds of conversational interfaces for us. You can use technology to take a poll, to play a game, to draw. There are all kinds of ways you can get everybody actively engaged in the conversation. So in closing, if you have a conversation with more than 7 people, you can absolutely succeed, but you need to do the work to figure out the best way to ensure everyone has a turn to speak, everyone is heard by at least one other person, and that as many voices are engaged in the conversation as possible.